Hi and welcome. Today we're going to take you through this agreement-driven CMDB framework that we have built in our ServiceNow instance. It's going to be a walkthrough where I'll show you how we have set up everything and how we actually end up integrating into our CMDB. But first of all, let me take a moment to tell you who I am. My name is Morten Kjær Schøler and I'm a configuration manager at Region Nordjylland in the Department of Digitalization and IT. I have spent a little over 3 years as a software developer, more than 4 years as our system administrator, administrating our ServiceNow instances, and for more than 1.5 years I have been our configuration manager as well, still going on. A little bit about my company. Well, we are 1 out of 5 Danish regions. We got around 590 inhabitants, and thereby we are the smallest Danish region. We got around 12,000 employees, of which around 180 are employed in digitalization and IT. As a Danish region, we are primarily responsible for providing healthcare services to our citizens. So let's take a look about today's agenda. First off, I'd like to show you the technical solution just at a glance, so you have an idea of how we are actually building this integration. I'm going to do the walkthrough using an existing example, so we don't have to set up everything from scratch. And I'll tell you a little bit about the prerequisites in order to actually do this setup we are going to do. And then there will be the actual walkthrough. But let me start by telling you about the technical solution. So here's what we built. And if you take a look at the beginning, this is an agreement-driven CMDB framework. That means that the data owner or vendor are actually having managed data repositories of data they own and they maintain. I, as a configuration manager, would like to store those information in the CMDB, and we will make an agreement about these information and which information are we going to use and how they're going to be stored. So we build up an agreement record, managed data repository agreement record, which will be an active part throughout this integration. Once we've set this up, the data owner will go through a REST API, providing reference to this agreement we've built. From there, ServiceNow will actually do the first authentication of the user, so we ensure that the user is who they claim to be. Once the user has been authenticated, we pass the information to the API we've built, from where it's evaluated that everything complies with the agreement we built. That is, in terms of the user coming with the data itself, the target, and everything is evaluated. If everything complies with the agreement, we move along and store the information in an import set table. From that import set table, we can transform everything and store the information as desired in the CMDB tables. So that's just a short introduction to the technical solution at a glance. The example I'm going to use today to demonstrate this walkthrough is an existing agreement-driven integration. And we actually have one managed data repository, but multiple agreements for that repository, because it's our virtual machine center, vCenters, where CI information is maintained for both virtual machine instances as well as computers. And you might say, why computers? Because those are actually servers primarily, but some of them also have a regular Windows 10 operating system. So we are able to actually maintain information about both computers, personal computers, servers, Linux servers, Windows servers, and so on. So therefore we have chosen the most higher representing class here. So the walkthrough would also be done in our test instance, just as a precaution measure. So if we're going to set everything up, there are some prerequisites. First off, we will be needing an Excel file from the managed data repository owner, and we'll be using that file to create the import set tables from. Then we also need to formalize the agreement about which CI classes are to be used. And we need a mid server for handling the actual integration. When everything is set up, I as a configuration manager relies on the data owner that he will extract his own data, transform it into the agreed format, and load it via the endpoint we have agreed upon. This script will also be placed on the mid server for later scheduling. I also have to set up identification and reconciliation rules so I ensure that everything will end up in the right place or update the correct CIs. Once we have all of this, we can actually move along and go and set everything up. So the walkthrough today will consist of 6 steps. First, we will need the managed data repository be registered. Otherwise, we're not aware we have this managed data repository and we cannot engage with the data owner. Once we have this, we can do the agreement with the data owner, providing the Excel file from which we can create a staging table or the import set table in order to be able to store the information they will pass along later. Then we need an explicit user, step 3, in order for the data owner to use through the API, ensuring access. And fourth, we need a discovery source, and if a suitable discovery source does not exist, we will have to create one. And we will have to ensure that everything about identification, reconciliation, and data source precedence are set up correctly. And fifth, we will actually go about and register the actual MDR agreement where everything is formalized, and that is going to be used actively during the configuration, during the integration. And point 6, we will actually go about and schedule a load once we have ensured everything is working as expected. So let's begin at registering the managed data repository. From my screen, you see an application menu called CMDB Inbound Framework. That is the application we've built. I am currently logged in as an administrator. That's why I see all these items here. Let me just take a moment to briefly explain to you what they are. The managed data repositories are available for everyone with an ITIL role. That's in order for them to register their own data source. As a configuration manager, I have the access to actually setting up and maintaining all of the agreements. And as a system administrator, I got all the administration possibilities, setting up some certain properties about the application, accessing transaction logs, viewing inbound ACLs, dashboards, automated tests, and so on and so forth. But we need the managed data repository to be registered. And as it happens to be, we have a managed data repository called VMware, which actually is defined by an assignment group and owned by, so we know who we are going to engage in making this agreement. We also know a little about which classes are actually known from this data source, so we got an idea of our target classes. And we also know that this data source is maintained automatically. If it was maintained manually, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to start feeding this information to the CMDB. So this is in essence the managed data repository. As a configuration manager, I will later on specify the discovery source, but we'll get to that. So once this managed data repository is registered, and we have engaged with the data repository owner, we have agreed that they have provided the Excel file I mentioned earlier, and we are going to create now the transform map. So if you take a look at my screen again, you see that for this we actually built a table. Let's just take the computer class as an example, where we make the staging table from all of the fields provided in the Excel arc, and we start by ensuring everything is as expected. From here, we will also need to ensure that we set up a correct transform map. So we use the source table, we create a transform map from which some fields are just simply mapped, others are scripted in order to map the information. And also we built an on before script ensuring that every thing is passed through the identification and reconciliation engine. So now that's set up and we are actually able to move on to be setting up the explicit user. So the explicit user will require certain roles in order for this to work. And we've set up a user called RN VMware. RN stands for Region Nordjylland. And we've provided it with some roles, of which 3 here are of importance. The first role are the role allowing the user access through the API. The 2 other roles here are the roles that allows the user to insert information into the import set tables. So now the access at this user is set up. And of course the user will also have a password in order to actually log in through the API. So setting up this user, we are now going to set up a discovery source. So we start by viewing the available discovery sources. And we did this and we didn't find a suitable discovery source, so we created one called VMware integration. Once we have created this discovery source, I as a configuration manager go to the managed data repository and set the discovery source. Right, so now we have assigned a discovery source for this. So it's time to move on to actually setting up and configuring the agreement. From this managed data repository record, we can view at the bottom certain kinds of agreements. Currently we are holding the transformation agreement, and there are 2 agreements, one for using computers and one for reading in the virtual machine instances. We're going to stick to the example about computers here. So we will set up the agreement. And from the agreement, we'll be setting up, first of all, a state, setting is this in use, is it draft or is it retired? And of course, it will only be valid through the API if it is in use. We will reference back to the managed data repository for which this agreement does apply. We also specify which users are allowed access through the API referencing this agreement. So here's the explicit user we created earlier. We also specify which CI classes are actually used, are being created, are being updated by this agreement. And we reference the transform map we built earlier on, from which we can see the import set table and the target table. And last but not least, we set up which fields are actually required. And the application is built so you can't deliver more information than we already have agreed upon, and that is built in the staging table. If the data owner does so, it will fail. If the data owner does not provide the mandatory information, it will fail. So we ensure that everything will be in compliance. So now we have set everything up. We have marked it as in use and we are ready to go about and check that everything works as expected. And it turns out it does. So we can go about scheduling the load now. So what we've done here is actually used schedule workflows. And the reason why we want to schedule this are actually 2. One, we would like to ensure that the load on ServiceNow is spread out across the day. And also we would like to ensure that reading information from certain data sources does not happen concurrently, putting a lot of stress on those systems. So we've built up these workflows which triggers the script, the PowerShell script in this case, that the data owner built and placed on the mid server. And we have scheduled it, for instance, for these computers. We will schedule it to run every day at 3 o'clock in the morning. And from that, we are actually able to schedule the workflow. We have integrated information from a managed data repository into our CMDB. We have made it agreement-driven, ensuring integrity of our CMDB, and we have delegated the responsibility so that the data owner still owns his own data, but benefits from seeing the data in a greater perspective in a central CMDB. That was what I had for today. I hope you have an idea about what's going on, and I thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.